At Christmas dinner, my dad raised his glass and laughed at me in front of 300 guests, calling me a fat pig in silk while the orchestra kept playing as if nothing was wrong. My sister leaned in with her perfect smile and smirked that no wonder my fiancé had left me, and the laughter that followed spread like wildfire, each sound cutting deeper than a knife. My hands tightened around my clutch until my knuckles burned, my throat thick with shame, but I refused to let them see me cry. I lifted my chin, the room spinning with humiliation and fury, and in that exact moment, something happened that silenced the entire ballroom. The chandelier above glittered like 1,000 frozen stars, and the laughter that had filled the air moments ago now echoed in my ears. Like a cruel chorus, I stepped through the gilded doors of the North Shore Hotel earlier that night. With my head high, though, every nerve in my body had begged me to turn back. The cold from outside still clung to my dress, making me uncomfortably aware of every curve my family loved to mock. 300 guests filled the grand space, the city's elite in black suits and jeweled gowns, glasses of champagne glinting under the lights. The orchestra played softly in the corner, violins rising against the hum of voices that had grown sharper the moment I appeared. I walked slowly, forcing each step to be steady, my heels tapping against the marble like a challenge. Eyes followed me, some curious, some pitying, many judging. Whispers stirred like wind before a storm. They always whispered. About my weight, about my broken engagement, about how I was the one who never measured up. My palms dampened, but I pressed my shoulders back and told myself tonight would not break me. At the center of the ballroom, my family sat on display. My dad Richard in his tuxedo stiff with pride. My mother Linda with her pearl smile that tried to cover what she refused to. Stop! My sister Olivia, shimmering under the chandeliers, angled perfectly for the photographer's lips curled in quiet victory. And my brother Michael leaning toward Dad, already absorbed in talk of Carter construction, as if Christmas dinner was just another board meeting. The scent of pine garlands and perfume clung to the air, but underneath it I caught the richer smells of roast beef and buttered rolls, carried on silver trays. I was nearly at the table when my dad's gaze caught me. His eyes narrowed just slightly, then he spread a smile sharp as glass. He stood lifting his glass high, his voice booming across the ballroom so the whole room turned. "Look at her!" His laugh followed cruel and loud, a fat pig in a silk dress. The words slammed into me harder than winter wind. Guests laughed, some too eager to please him, others nervous but unwilling to stand apart. The sound stung worse than silence ever could. I felt my cheeks blaze, my chest tighten, but my feet would not move. I was trapped in place, their ridicule closing in from every side. Olivia leaned in, her voice sweet as poison. No wonder her fiancé left. She let the diamond on her finger catch the light as her smirk widened. More laughter, sharper this time, like knives against skin. My stomach twisted, my hands trembled. Memories of Tom flashed sharp and raw, his betrayal still fresh, and my family's choice to believe him rather than me carved like a scar. They had never forgiven me for letting him go. I swallowed the fire in my throat and forced my chin higher. Crying would give them exactly what they wanted. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the orchestra. And then it happened. The scrape of a chair, a voice rising steady and clear. Words that cut through the noise and stopped the room cold. Every laugh died in an instant. Forks hovered midair. The orchestra faltered into silence. The chandeliers glimmered above us, but all I could feel was the shift in the air, heavy and electric. For the first time that night, the humiliation was no longer mine to carry. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for what would come next. 2 years earlier, the winter in Chicago bit through my coat as if it wanted to mark me with the season of my undoing. I was 25, young enough to still believe that love could conquer the shadows in a family like mine, but old enough to sense that every choice I made would be judged as either my redemption or my ruin. The engagement ring on my finger glittered whenever I held out my hand, a promise of stability, of acceptance. Tom Parker was the man my family had praised, the engineer who carried himself with quiet ambition, who spoke politely to my dad about construction and future contracts. My mother beamed whenever he walked through the door. Olivia all but worshipped his success, and even my dad nodded in approval, which was more affection than he had ever shown me. I wanted to believe Tom loved me. I wanted to believe his touch on my arm meant more than duty or opportunity. We had dated for a year before he proposed, kneeling in the middle of Millennium Park with the snow spinning around us, like glitter shaken from a jar. People clapped, strangers shouted their congratulations, and I felt a blush of pride when Tom slipped the ring onto my hand. For once I thought I was enough. But love has a way of slipping through cracks you pretend not to see. It started small, like a hairline fracture. Late nights at the office that stretched into dawn. texts he ignored with excuses of bad reception. The faint scent of perfume on his coat, not mine sweeter, sharper. I asked once and he brushed it off with a laugh, saying a coworker had hugged him after a long project. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded and pushed the doubt aside. Weeks later, I found a receipt folded in his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license. Dinner for two at a restaurant we had always said was too expensive. The date on the slip matched the night he told me he had a late client meeting. My chest tightened as if the paper itself cut me. I pressed it back into his wallet and said nothing. Silence had been my armor for years. Speaking truth in my family only brought scorn, and with Tom I feared the same. Still, the fracture widened. His phone buzzed at odd hours. I saw his smile when he glanced at the screen, a smile different from the one he gave me, softer, unguarded. My stomach twisted, but I remained still. I told myself maybe work stress made him distant. I told myself maybe I was too sensitive. Every night I curled beneath the quilt on my bed, listening to the city winds rattle the windows, replaying the excuses he gave until my mind spun dizzy. One night I followed instinct instead of reason. Tom said he would be late, another late meeting, another project deadline. I drove past his office downtown. The lights were dark. My breath fogged the windshield as I sat in the car, watching the empty building, willing him to appear. He never did. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the urge to drive aimlessly through the city to catch him in the lie. I went home, sat in the living room with the lamp casting weak light, and waited. When he walked in near midnight, tie loosened, smelling faintly of perfume, he smiled as though nothing had happened. He kissed my forehead and told me I worried too much. I nodded again, the silence burning my throat. It was in spring when the truth bared itself with cruelty I could no longer ignore. I stopped by his apartment to surprise him with coffee and donuts before work. The hallway smelled of lilies, not the usual stale carpet scent. When I opened his door with the spare key he had given me, I heard laughter that was not his. A woman stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in one of his shirts, her hair wet, her voice casual as if she belonged there. She froze when she saw me, her eyes wide with the shock of a secret uncovered. Tom appeared behind her, shirtless, his face draining of color. "Tiffany," he started, but the rest of his words tangled into excuses I never let him finish. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, hot liquid splattering on the floor. I felt my heart tear with a soundless scream. I walked out before he could follow the ring, heavy and cold on my finger. Later that evening, he came to my apartment, knocking until the neighbors peeked through their peepholes. I opened the door arms, crossed the ring set on the counter behind me. He begged, said it was a mistake, that the woman meant nothing, that stress had made him stupid. His voice cracked with desperation, but my ears heard only the betrayal replayed in whispers and laughter. I told him quietly that it was over. I placed the ring in his palm and closed his fingers around it. He tried to argue, said we could fix it, said he loved me, but I turned away. Silence again became my shield. The next day, I sat at breakfast with my family, the smell of bacon and coffee in the air, my mother's pearls glinting as she buttered toast. My dad folded the newspaper with a sharp snap and looked at me. "Where's the ring?" he asked, his voice low, dangerous. Olivia smirked, waiting for drama. I kept my eyes on my plate. "It's done," I said softly. The reaction was swift. My mother gasped. Olivia let out a laugh of disbelief, and my dad's face darkened like a storm gathering. "You had one chance," he said, slamming his hand on the table so the cups rattled. "One man good enough to take you, and you threw it away." I clenched my fork, the metal biting into my palm, but I said nothing. If I spoke the truth that Tom had cheated, they would not believe me. They adored him, his career, his polished manners. They saw him as a prize and me as the one who should be grateful. So I swallowed my pride and carried the blame. For weeks, the house echoed with their disappointment. Olivia told anyone who would listen that I had ruined everything, that Tom was too good for me anyway. My dad barely looked at me, muttering about wasted chances. At family dinners, my mother sighed theatrically and asked why I could not just apologize and beg him back. I cried in secret. In the shower with the water loud enough to drown the sound. In the car when traffic hid my tears. But in front of them I stayed silent, my face composed, my words few. That silence became my cage, but also the seed of something else. Each insult, each smirk, each cold shoulder planted a deeper resolve. I carried that secret like a stone in my chest, knowing one day the truth would matter. Not because I wanted to shame Tom, though he deserved it, but because I wanted to reclaim the part of me they had buried under lies. The months after I ended my engagement with Tom stretched like an endless winter, even though spring had already touched the city. Chicago streets bustled with their usual noise, trains rattled overhead, taxis honked at each other, and Lake Michigan gleamed under the sunlight. But inside me there was only gray. Every corner reminded me of whispered gossip. Every family dinner carried the echo of disappointment. I returned to my small apartment with its second-hand furniture and peeling paint on the bathroom tiles, telling myself I would rebuild piece by piece. I was 26, still young, but I felt ancient each morning as I looked in the mirror and braced for another day of proving my worth to people determined to strip it away. My job at a mid-level marketing firm in the Loop became my anchor. I buried myself in pitches, late nights drafting campaigns for products I barely cared about, just so my mind would not circle back to Tom's betrayal or my dad's words at breakfast. The office smelled of burnt coffee and toner, the hum of printers filling the air, and in that ordinary noise I found relief. My colleagues were polite, some curious about the failed engagement, but I kept my answers short. Privacy was the only power I had left. Still, rumors travel faster than emails. I overheard whispers near the water cooler, people saying Olivia had been in last week, telling a few of them that her poor sister could not hold on to a good man. My cheeks burned, but I walked past them without a word. I told myself silence was strength, though it tasted bitter. On Friday evenings, when the city buzzed with people heading to bars, I sat in my apartment with a glass of cheap red wine, staring at the skyline from my window. Samantha Brooks would sometimes stop by, dropping her coat on the chair with the ease of long friendship. She had been with me since college through exams, heartbreaks, and hangovers, and she never asked more than she thought I could give. One night, she brought pizza, the box steaming up my small kitchen. She watched me as I picked at a slice, the cheese stretching and falling back onto the plate. "You are not broken, Tiff," she said softly. "He cheated. You cut him out. That is strength, not weakness." I shrugged, unwilling to let the words sink in. My family does not see it that way. They think I threw away the only man who would ever want me. Samantha's eyes sharpened, her voice low with anger. "Then your family is blind and cruel. You do not owe them your silence." Her words pressed against the dam inside me, but I still held back. Speaking up had never saved me before. Still, her loyalty wrapped around me like a blanket. When she left that night, I felt less alone, though the ache never truly left. By summer, I had regained a rhythm. Work, gym, groceries, quiet weekends. Yet the Carter name tied me to my dad's empire whether I wanted it or not. Carter Construction was a giant in the city, cranes with our name etched across steel arms towering over new high-rises. I never worked there officially, but my bloodline meant my presence could not be ignored. So when Olivia invited me to a company meeting, I hesitated but agreed. She insisted it was important for family to be seen together, though I knew her motives were sharper. The conference room smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee, the long table gleaming under fluorescent lights. Executives in suits nodded respectfully to my dad at the head, their eyes sliding over me with polite indifference. I sat near the end, keeping my hands folded in my lap. Olivia took the floor with a PowerPoint presentation, her voice crisp, rehearsed. She glanced at me, once a spark of mischief in her eyes, and I braced myself. Toward the end, she shifted gears. "Of course, not all of us have been so successful," she said lightly, her gaze sweeping the room. "Some of us cannot even hold on to a fiancé." The words cut clean and deliberate. A ripple of awkward laughter moved across the table. My throat closed as heat rose to my face. I wanted to stand, to shout, to tell every person there that Tom had betrayed me, not the other way around. But I saw my dad watching from the head of the table, his expression unreadable but his silence loud. I pushed my chair back. The scrape against the floor echoed in the room. I walked out, each step heavy, the laughter still ringing in my ears. In the hallway, my vision blurred, the paintings on the walls smearing into colors. I reached the restroom, leaned over the sink, and let the tears fall silently. In the mirror, I saw a woman both fragile and furious. I pressed cold water to my face, breathing until my chest steadied. I could not keep letting them strip me piece by piece. Something inside me hardened. That night, I opened a journal and wrote every word Olivia had said, every insult, every look from my dad, every sigh from my mother. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the ink smudged on the page. It was my record, my proof to myself that I was not imagining the cruelty. Days turned into weeks. The more they dismissed me, the more determined I became to carve a path beyond their control. At the gym, I ran longer, lifting until sweat blurred my sight. At work, I pitched bold campaigns, my voice steady, even when my heart raced. Slowly, colleagues began to respect me not as Carter's daughter, but as Tiffany. That mattered, yet family dinners remained a battlefield. My mother's pearls glinted as she sighed dramatically, telling me how Olivia was thriving, how Michael was securing contracts for Dad. She asked why I could not just be more like them. I stirred my mashed potatoes, keeping my eyes down. Silence again. Olivia smirked, sipping her wine. "Not everyone is cut out for success. Some of us are meant to linger in the shadows." The table laughed softly and my dad did nothing to stop it. I excused myself early, stepping out into the cold night air. The wind off the lake whipped against my cheeks, but I welcomed the sting. I stood on the driveway staring at the mansion glowing with warm lights, hearing faint echoes of laughter through the windows. For a moment, despair threatened to drag me under. Then I gripped the keys in my pocket so hard the edges bit into my palm. One day, I whispered to myself, one day they will see. The summer heat clung to Chicago that year, heavy and sticky, pressing against my skin as though it wanted to remind me I was still alive, despite everything. I remember walking up the wide marble steps of the museum where the charity gala was being held, my dress clinging to my back, my hair sticking to my neck even though I had spent an hour curling it. The banners above this entrance read in bold letters about raising funds for children's hospitals, a noble cause that drew every influential family in the city. I had been invited, not because anyone wanted me there, but because our last name still carried weight. The Carters could not be absent from such an event without raising questions. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers glowed with golden light, the air cool with overworked air conditioning, the murmur of voices blending with the clink of glasses. Tables were draped in white linen, servers carried trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the stage. I felt out of place as I walked through the crowd. I always felt out of place. My family scattered quickly into groups, my dad shaking hands with donors, Olivia flashing her rehearsed smile to the cameras, my mother adjusting her pearl necklace as she drifted toward her circle of friends. I stood alone near the edge of the room, clutching my clutch as if it might shield me. That was when I first noticed David Reynolds. He was standing across the room near one of the tall windows, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit tailored to perfection. His dark hair was touched with just enough gray to give him gravity, and his eyes seemed to take in everything without rushing. He was speaking with two men in suits, but every so often his gaze swept the room, landing briefly on me before moving on. At first, I thought I imagined it, but the third time our eyes met, I felt a jolt run through me, sharp and unsettling. I tried to look away, but the weight of his attention lingered. A server stopped by, offering champagne, and I took a glass, though I barely sipped. My stomach was tight with nerves, not just because of him, but because I could sense Olivia watching me from across the room, her smirk ready if I tripped or spilled or made some other mistake she could turn into gossip. The evening unfolded with speeches and applause, the usual parade of checks held up for photographs. My dad clapped at the right moments, whispered to board members about potential contracts, his laugh too loud, too practiced. I kept to the edges until I found myself near a table of silent auction items, staring at a painting of the Chicago skyline rendered in oil. That was when David appeared beside me. "It is striking," he said, his voice smooth, steady. "It's not easy to capture the lake like that." I startled slightly, gripping my glass tighter. "Yes," I managed my voice soft. "It is beautiful." He studied the painting for a moment before turning to me. "You are Tiffany Wright, Richard's daughter." The way he said it was different. Not dismissive, not curious gossip, but as though he wanted to connect me to something more than my dad's shadow. I nodded. "Yes, and you are David Reynolds." He smiled faintly, "Guilty as charged." He glanced at the crowd around us. "These events can feel suffocating, can't they?" I exhaled, surprised by his candor. "Yes, very much." We spoke quietly, just enough to pass unnoticed. He asked about my work and listened when I said marketing, nodding with genuine interest. No one in my family ever asked about my job, unless it was to remind me it was beneath the Carter name. When David asked, I felt seen, not as an extension of my dad's company, but as myself. The evening ended with applause for the largest donors, my dad among them, his name announced with fanfare. Cameras flashed. Olivia positioned herself perfectly beside him. I slipped away before the final toast, stepping into the warm night air, my heels clicking against the pavement. As I waited for a cab, I felt a presence beside me. Leaving early, David said, his voice calm. I turned startled again, then nodded. "I have seen enough." He looked at me closely, not unkindly. Sometimes leaving is the strongest thing you can do. He lifted his hand slightly as if to offer me his card, then paused. Instead, he said quietly, "Take care, Tiffany." He walked away before I could respond, his figure fading into the night. That moment stayed with me for weeks. His words, his gaze, the way he listened. It was like finding water in a desert. My family never noticed me, never valued me. But David had looked directly at me and seen more. Our paths crossed again a month later at another event, a fundraiser for veterans. This time he approached me with ease, asking how my latest project at work was going. I blinked in surprise, realizing he had remembered. We spoke longer this time, our conversation flowing effortlessly from work to books to the absurdity of high society dinners. He laughed at my dry jokes and I found myself laughing too, a sound I had not heard from myself in months. Soon we began meetings outside of events. A coffee near Millennium Park, a walk by the lake. He told me about his investments, about the risks and rewards, but also about his late wife, how grief had taught him the fragility of appearances. I told him about my failed engagement, about the silence I carried, though I left out the sharpest details. He listened without judgment, his eyes steady, his hand warm when it brushed mine. Each meeting left me unsettled yet stronger. I began to realize that my worth did not depend on my dad's approval or Olivia's cruelty. Someone respected me simply because I existed. One evening after dinner, at a quiet restaurant tucked away on a side street, David walked me to my car. The summer air was heavy with the scent of lilacs from a nearby garden. He paused, his hand lingering near mine, his voice low. "You deserve more than what they give you, Tiffany. Do not let them decide your story." The words pierced me deeper than any insult my family had thrown. They sparked something inside me, a flame I had almost let die. I looked at him, at the steady calm in his expression, and for the first time in years I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could rise above the shadows. I had not planned for the test to come back positive. I had taken it only to silence the unease that had followed me for weeks. The strange heaviness in my body, the way sleep clung to me in the mornings, and the sudden wave of nausea that rose at the scent of coffee. I stood barefoot on the cold tile of my bathroom, the little plastic stick trembling in my hand as two faint lines bled into view. My heart stuttered, then pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. Pregnant. The word thundered in my head as though it belonged to someone else. I gripped the counter, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my pale face framed by messy hair. The woman looking back at me seemed both terrified and alive in a way she had not been in years. I sank onto the edge of the tub, the stick clutched in my hand, and tried to breathe. My mind tumbled through memories of late dinners with David, his steady voice telling me I deserved more, the warmth of his hand over mine. 1,000 questions crashed into each other. How would my family react? What would this mean for David's reputation? Could I carry a child into a world where my worth had always been measured against everyone else's success? The phone rang on the counter, startling me. I grabbed it, heart racing, only to see David's name glowing on the screen. I pressed the answer with trembling fingers. His voice was calm as always. "How are you, Tiffany?" I swallowed hard. "Different." I hesitated, then whispered, "I need to see you." We met that evening in a quiet cafe near the river, the kind of place where the dim lights made every table feel private. He arrived in a navy suit, his tie loosened, his eyes searching mine as he sat down. I could barely hold his gaze. I slid the test across the table in a paper napkin. His hand stilled as he opened it. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the clink of cups from the counter. Finally, he looked up, his eyes not shocked but steady. "We are having a child." The words washed over me, both terrifying and grounding. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes." He reached across this table, covering my hand with his. "Tiffany, this is not something to fear. I will stand by you. We can tell them together, let the world know." I pulled my hand back, gently shaking my head. "Not yet. You do not know my family. They will twist it, use it, ruin it. I need time." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Whatever you need. But you will not face this alone." The reassurance warmed me, but doubt still gnawed at the edges. I knew too well how quickly secrets could unravel. For weeks I carried the knowledge quietly, the weight both burden and shield. I moved through work with a strange calm, answering emails, drafting campaigns, pretending I was just another woman in the office, while inside me a new life grew. At night I lay awake, my hand on my stomach, whispering promises to a child who could not yet hear me. But silence, as always, drew suspicion. Michael began to notice my absences, the way I left early for appointments, the way I pushed wine away at family dinners. One evening, he cornered me in the driveway as I was unlocking my car. His tie was loose, his face weary, but his eyes sharp. "You are hiding something, Tiffany." I forced a smile. "Just work. Stress." He studied me, his jaw tightening. "I am a lawyer. I know when someone is keeping secrets." I shrugged, sliding into the car before he could press further. He watched me drive away, suspicion carved deep into his expression. Worse was Olivia. She had a predator's instinct for weakness. A week later, she spotted me leaving a clinic downtown. I had gone for a routine check, clutching the ultrasound printout like a fragile secret in my purse. She leaned against her car across the street, sunglasses perched on her nose, a slow smirk spreading across her lips as she watched me freeze. "What are you up to, little sister?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise of traffic. I forced a laugh, pretending to be calm. "Just a checkup. Nothing special." Her eyes glinted. "We will see." She slid into her car and drove off, leaving me trembling on the sidewalk, the ultrasound burning against my ribs like contraband. I pressed a hand to my stomach, whispering to myself, "Not yet. Not like this." That night I called Samantha. Her voice, bright and steady, soothed me through the crackling line. "Tell me what is going on, Tiff." I told her everything. The test, the cafe, David's reaction, Michael's suspicion, Olivia's smirk. Silence followed, then her voice firm. "This does not have to be their story. It is yours. Protect it until you are ready." I closed my eyes, letting her words settle into me. For once, someone trusted me to make my own choice. Still, each day felt like walking a tightrope. At work, I wore loose blouses, smiled when colleagues offered wine at happy hour, claimed migraines when I felt queasy. At family dinners, I pushed food around my plate, enduring Olivia's sharp glances, Michael's pointed questions, and my dad's booming voice about company profits. My mother fussed about centerpieces and charities, never seeing me at all. I wrote in my journal at night, documenting every symptom, every fear, every flicker of hope. I wrote about David's hand on mine, about the way his voice steadied me, about the way I wanted to believe in a future that was not defined by humiliation. I wrote about the child, the secret heartbeat inside me that gave me courage even as it terrified me. The city moved forward with its relentless rhythm trains screeching, sirens wailing, people rushing. But inside me a quieter rhythm grew, one that promised change I could not yet name. Dinner at my parents' house had always been a performance, but that evening felt like stepping into a theater where I was cast as the fool. The long oak table gleamed under the chandelier, polished so thoroughly I could see my reflection on its surface. Plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans steamed in the center, filling the room with the warmth that was anything but comforting. I sat near the end, as far from my dad as possible, the silverware heavy in my hand. He cleared his throat, his voice booming with the confidence of a man used to controlling every conversation. "Another strong quarter for Carter Construction," he announced, stabbing a piece of chicken with his fork. "Contracts are rolling in. We will break records this year." Michael leaned forward, nodding eagerly. "That is excellent news, Dad. The board will be thrilled." My mother smiled serenely, pearls glinting around her neck. She reached for the bread basket and passed it to Olivia, who took it with delicate fingers and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Then Olivia's gaze slid toward me, lingering just long enough to make my stomach twist. "And what about you, Tiffany?" she asked sweetly. "Still at that little marketing firm?" I forced a polite smile, though my fork trembled slightly. "Yes. We are working on a campaign for a new beverage line." Olivia tilted her head, her smirk growing. "So glamorous." She laughed lightly, sipping her wine. "Some of us were made for boardrooms, others for back rooms." The table chuckled softly, even my mother hiding a smile behind her napkin. My dad did not correct Olivia, did not defend me. He cut another bite of chicken and nodded as though her cruelty was true. I pressed my palms against my thighs under the table, grounding myself. The air in the dining room grew heavy, pressing against my chest. My stomach churned, not from food but from the secret I carried, the life growing inside me. I could feel it like a hidden fire, giving me strength even as the world tried to smother it. Michael leaned back, studying me with narrowed eyes. "You've been quiet lately, Tiffany. Missing dinners? Skipping family gatherings? Something you want to share?" His tone was casual, but his gaze was sharp. I shook my head, lifting my water glass. "Just busy with work." He did not believe me. I could see it in the tight line of his jaw. Dad finally looked up from his plate, his eyes narrowing. "Busy," he repeated, his voice laced with disdain. "Busy hiding from responsibility, more like." My chest tightened, but I did not speak. I had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon. The less I gave them, the more they revealed of themselves. Olivia laughed again, brushing her hair back from her face. "It is no surprise, really. No man, no career worth mentioning, nothing to show for 27 years. Some people are just meant to be background noise." The laughter around the table stung, each chuckle like a lash across my skin. My mother did not look at me. Michael frowned but said nothing. My dad smirked into his glass of wine. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled, letting the cruelty pass over me like wind. I smiled faintly, which made Olivia's smirk falter for just a second. Dinner dragged on, the clatter of silverware and murmurs about contracts and board decisions filling the space. My dad's pride in his empire swelled with every bite, as if profits erased the cracks in our family. After dessert, as we rose from the table, Olivia caught me in the hallway. The scent of her perfume filled the narrow space, cloying and sweet. She leaned close, her voice low. "You think you are hiding something?" she whispered. "But I see you. I always see you." I met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "Then you will know when the time is right." Her smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes before she recovered. "We will see," she said, and swept past me, her heels clicking on the hardwood. I stood there, my heart pounding, my hand resting briefly on my stomach. The walls of that house had heard too many insults, too many secrets. But inside me, the truth waited patient and strong. Later that night in my apartment, I sat at my desk with the journal open. I wrote every word from dinner, every insult, every glance, every laugh. I wrote Olivia's whisper in the hallway, Michael's suspicion, Dad's disdain. I wrote to remember, to build the record of what they were and what I was becoming. And for the first time in years, I did not cry after closing the book. I smiled instead, a small, fierce smile, knowing that silence was no longer only my shield. It was also my strategy. Far across the city, the cranes of Carter Construction rose against the night sky, their arms stretched like giants. My dad believed they would stand forever. But even giants fall, and when they do, I would be ready. Christmas in my family had never been about joy. It was about image, about who looked the most polished under the chandeliers, who laughed the loudest in front of 300 guests. That year, my dad made sure the Carter Christmas dinner would be remembered as the grandest event Chicago had seen. For him, it was a coronation. For me, it was a trap. The invitations themselves felt like weapons, heavy cardstock embossed with gold, hand-delivered by courier, carrying a message as sharp as any threat. Everyone who mattered in the city was summoned: senators, business partners, society women who lived for gossip. Even a handful of journalists promised an evening of glamour. My dad wanted the press. He wanted the stage set for a spectacle. I had overheard the plan weeks earlier. Olivia had whispered to Dad in the kitchen, her voice a hiss edged with triumph. "She's weak," she had said. "Tonight, we end the charade." His reply had been colder than December air. "Let her come. Let them all see what she really is." The memory of those words sat heavy inside me as I zipped my dress that night. My reflection in the mirror looked both familiar and strange. The silk clung in places I had always been ashamed of. But tonight I refused to see shame. Tonight it was armor. I placed a hand on my stomach, felt the quiet pulse of the child inside me, and whispered, "We are not theirs to break." Snow fell hard as I arrived at the North Shore Hotel. Outside, valets rushed to catch cars, their breath white in the cold. Inside, the lobby glowed with golden light, garlands and wreaths strung across high windows, a massive Christmas tree glittering in the center. Laughter echoed against marble walls, champagne glasses clinked, and cameras flashed as guests arrived in waves. Through the glass doors, I saw them, my dad radiant in his tuxedo, shaking hands as if every man owed him their loyalty. My mother, Pearls, shining her smile stretched tight, Olivia glowing in her gown, tilting her chin so photographers could capture her best angle. Michael hovered near Dad's shoulder, already deep in talk about contracts. They looked untouchable, a dynasty framed in gold, but I knew the cracks. I stepped into the lobby, the warmth rushing over me, the scent of pine and roasted meat filling my lungs. Every click of my heels against marble echoed too loud, drawing eyes whispers. I felt them judging, remembering every rumor, the broken engagement. The weight, I never lost the whispers that I was never enough. The ballroom was breathtaking. Chandeliers blazed above tables draped in crimson and gold, silver polished until it gleamed. The orchestra tuned in the corner, violins slicing through the hum of conversation. Waiters glided between tables, balancing trays of wine. My place was at the center table in full view of the cameras. A perfect stage for the humiliation they had planned. I sat, smoothing my dress, my hands steady despite the fire in my chest. Dinner began. Laughter rose and fell. Knives scraped plates. The air buzzed with chatter. Olivia leaned close to my mother, whispering with her smirk angled at me. My dad held court at the head, telling stories too loud, raising glasses too often. My mother's laugh rang false, polished like glass. Michael stayed quiet, though his eyes flicked toward me more than once, unreadable. Halfway through, I excused myself. In the powder room, I faced the mirror. The woman looking back at me had sharp eyes, squared shoulders. She didn't look like someone waiting for approval. She looked ready for war. On my way back, I heard voices through a side corridor. Olivia's laugh, bright and sharp. "When I humiliate her in front of everyone, she'll finally disappear." My dad's reply was low, final. "Make it quick. No doubt left about who she is." Their trap was set. They had polished the knives. But standing in that corridor, I felt no fear. Only clarity. They had forgotten something vital. I was no longer afraid of their laughter. I stepped back into the ballroom. Chandeliers blazed, cameras flashed, voices hummed. The orchestra played a soft carol, strings rising like the opening of a storm. I crossed the floor and sat again at the table, my chin lifted, my pulse steady. David Reynolds was across from me, silent, his eyes steady on mine. His expression was unreadable, but his presence was a shield. The air shifted heavy with anticipation. My dad would rise soon, I knew, glass in hand, ready to deliver the toast that would turn into my execution. My dad rose with the kind of confidence that had carried him through decades of business deals. His tuxedo caught the chandelier's light. His smile stretched wide, practiced and sharp. He lifted his glass and the ballroom hushed instantly. Even the waiters froze mid-step, trays balanced as though afraid to break the spell. He began with charm. He thanked the guests for coming, spoke of family and tradition, and boasted of Carter Construction's success. People nodded, smiled, clinked their glasses politely. But then I saw the shift, the flicker in his eyes as his gaze landed on me. "And of course my daughter Tiffany," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. A pause long enough for 300 people to turn their heads. Look at her. A fat pig in silk. Laughter exploded like glass shattering. Some guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure if it was truly a joke, while others leaned into the cruelty, their voices sharp and eager. Heat rushed to my face, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tight my knuckles burned. I forced myself to breathe, to hold steady, but the air was thick, suffocating. Then Olivia leaned forward, her smile gleaming like a knife. No wonder her fiancé left. The words sliced clean through me, dragging up memories I had buried: Tom's betrayal, the night I found him with another woman, my dad's refusal to believe me. Shame I thought I had shed roared back like fire. The laughter grew louder, sharper. My chest ached. For a second I thought I might break, that I might cry in front of them all. But something held me steady, something stronger than fear. A chair scraped across the polished floor, the sound so loud it silenced the room. David Reynolds stood. He was calm, composed, his tall frame commanding every eye. He set his glass down carefully and spoke in a voice that was steady, strong, and impossible to ignore. "She is carrying my child." The words dropped into the air like a bomb. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Forks hovered midair, champagne glasses froze inches from lips. Gasps spread across the room, whispers tumbling like waves. "Did you hear him?" My God, is it true? I sat frozen. My breath caught, my hand drifting to my stomach without thought. When I looked at David, his gaze was steady, unwavering, and he gave me the smallest nod, a promise. My dad's face drained of color, his hand clutching the chair for balance. "Lies," he barked, though his voice cracked. "She is lying. Tell them you are lying." David did not flinch. "I do not lie, Richard. The child is mine, and I will not let her be mocked by you or anyone else." Gasps again. Phones lifted, cameras clicked. Rebecca Stone was already scribbling furiously, her photographer capturing every frozen expression, Olivia's smirk collapsing, my dad's fury, my own stunned stillness. The empire my dad had built began to fracture right there, in the glow of chandeliers in front of 300 witnesses. And for the first time, I was not the one humiliated, it was him. The room erupted not with applause, but with chaos. The orchestra faltered into silence, bows dropping from strings. Guests twisted in their seats, whispering furiously, some covering their mouths as if the scandal might contaminate them. The chandeliers still shone brilliantly, but under their glow, my dad looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Rebecca Stone's voice rose above the din, sharp and sure. "Richard, is it true? Is your daughter carrying your partner's child?" Cameras flashed the light, harsh, unrelenting. My dad tried to speak, his lips trembling. "Lies," he croaked, clutching the table. "She's a liar. David is a fool." But his words rang hollow, swallowed by the sea of murmurs. Olivia snapped next, her hand slamming onto the table, eyes wild. "Don't believe this. She's pathetic. She's nothing." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the silence that followed was louder than any laugh. Even the guests who once adored her recoiled at the venom. I turned to her slowly, my voice calm, clear enough to carry. "I didn't need to ruin you, Olivia. You and Dad managed that on your own." A ripple went through the crowd, sharp intakes of breath, heads turning to catch every syllable. For years I had stayed silent, endured their cruelty in quiet. Tonight my voice landed like a blade and people listened. My dad slammed his fist on the table, silverware rattling. "Enough," he shouted, though his voice cracked halfway. "This is over." "We are leaving." But no one moved. No guests stood, no loyal allies rushed to his side. They stayed rooted in their chairs, not as supporters, but as witnesses. They wanted to see the rest. David remained standing, his presence calm, anchoring the room. His voice carried easily. "There's nothing more to argue. The truth is out." Phones rose higher, capturing every moment, ensuring by morning the story would belong to the world. Michael finally moved, his voice low but firm. "Dad, stop. You're making it worse." His hand gripped Dad's arm, steadying him as his body swayed. For the first time in my life, I heard my brother speak against him. My dad's eyes darted between Michael and me, bewildered, betrayed. The control he had always commanded was gone, slipping like water through his fists. His chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, but he said nothing. I sat tall, the silk of my dress catching the light, my chin lifted. I felt fear, yes, but it no longer ruled me. What filled me instead was power, not the kind my dad worshipped, but the power of truth finally cutting through years of silence. The ballroom buzzed with gossip, the air heavy with scandal, but at the center I was steady. The humiliation was no longer mine. It was theirs. The ballroom was no longer a celebration, but a battlefield littered with broken pride. Glasses stood, half-empty plates pushed aside, guests clustering in small groups, whispering with the thrill of scandal. Every click of a camera sealed my dad's downfall in permanent record. Richard Carter, the man who once commanded boardrooms and silenced opponents with a single glare, sagged in his chair. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his face, sweat shining on his temples. He looked not like the titan of Chicago construction, but like an old man, realizing his kingdom had been built on sand. Olivia's mask slipped completely. Her smile was gone, her eyes red, her voice shaking with rage. "You planned this," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You waited until tonight to destroy us." I met her fury with calm. "No, Olivia. You destroyed yourselves." The cameras flashed again, catching her face twisted with anger and mine serene. Her husband tugged at her arm, urging her to sit, but she ripped free. She grabbed a glass, held it tight, then let it slip through her fingers. It shattered across the table, red wine streaking like blood over the white cloth. Gasps rang out, but she only sat back down shaking, glaring at me with eyes that promised she would never forgive. Michael stood silently beside Dad, his hand resting on his shoulder. The boy who once stayed quiet now looked like the only tether keeping my dad upright. I caught his eyes for a moment and saw conflict, sadness, but also recognition. He knew the truth could no longer be buried. David broke the silence, his voice calm but final. "This dinner is over. Guests may leave." Chairs scraped back. Some people rushed out, eager to distance themselves from the Carters before reporters cornered them. Others lingered, eyes bright, savoring the spectacle as if it were theater. Rebecca Stone stood near the back, still writing, her photographer capturing every last detail. My dad had invited her for glory, but tonight she carried evidence of his ruin. I rose slowly, my chair scraping across the polished floor. The sound echoed sharp and deliberate. Every eye turned as I stood, not broken, but tall, my chin lifted. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like the family's shame. I felt like the truth standing in the middle of their lies. I walked toward the doors, each step steady, the silk of my dress whispering against the marble. Behind me, I could hear my dad's ragged breathing, Olivia's muffled sob, the low murmur of voices cataloging every detail to spread before sunrise. Snow swirled outside the tall glass windows, catching the glow of streetlights. The cold air wrapped around me as I stepped through the hotel's grand entrance. David only a step behind. The empire had cracked. The humiliation was theirs now. And for the first time, the night did not end with me running from their cruelty. It ended with me walking away. The ballroom shimmered with light as the orchestra finished a triumphant flourish and the waiters poured another round of champagne. My dad rose slowly from his chair, the smile on his face wide and practiced. The kind of smile that had sealed multi-million-dollar deals and bent boardrooms to his will. The clinking of silverware against crystal drew every head toward him, and soon the room fell quiet except for the rustle of gowns and the muffled shuffle of chairs. He held up his glass, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. For one frozen instant, I thought perhaps he would keep it civil. Perhaps the grand dinner would pass without blood drawn. But then he laughed loud and sharp, the sound cutting through the silence. "Look at her, a fat pig in a silk dress." The words rang across the ballroom like a bell tolling doom. Laughter erupted, a cruel chorus that echoed off marble and glass. Some guests laughed too quickly, eager to prove loyalty. Others chuckled nervously, their eyes flicking to me with pity before sliding away. The weight of their judgment pressed down on me until my lungs felt squeezed. My cheeks burned. My fingers clenched around the stem of my glass until I feared it would snap. I forced myself to breathe, to hold still, to remember every insult carved into me since childhood. But before I could gather myself, Olivia leaned forward, her smile poised like a dagger. No wonder her fiancé left. The laughter doubled, sharper, uglier. My stomach nodded. The air smelled suddenly of sweat and perfume, heavy and suffocating. I felt the old familiar ache, the urge to flee, to vanish into silence. Yet something deeper kept me rooted, a fire that had been growing inside me for months. Then it happened. The scrape of a chair against the polished floor thundered louder than the laughter. David Reynolds rose, his broad frame towering above the table. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned as he scanned the room. He set down his glass with deliberate care, his voice steady, clear, and strong enough to slice through the noise. "She is carrying my child." The ballroom froze. The laughter died as if strangled mid-breath. Glasses hovered, half-raised forks halted mid-air. The orchestra fell silent. A stillness spread so thick I could hear my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. My dad's face drained of color, his jaw slack. Olivia's smirk vanished, replaced by shock that tightened her features. My mother's hand hovered over her pearls, frozen in mid-adjustment. Michael stared wide-eyed, his lips pressed together as if holding back words he could not shape. Gasps broke out around the room, whispers rising like a tide. "Did he say child? Did you hear him, my God?" I sat unmoving, my body rigid with the force of the moment. My hand drifted to my stomach almost without thought, and when I caught David's gaze, he nodded, once firm, unflinching. Across the room, a camera flash burst, then another. Rebecca Stone, the journalist, was already on her feet, scribbling in a notepad while her photographer snapped pictures. My dad had invited the press to capture his triumph, and instead they had captured his ruin. My dad stammered, his voice hoarse. "That is not true. She is lying." He looked at David as if pleading. "Tell them you are lying." David's jaw tightened. His voice carried calm authority. "I do not lie, Richard. The child is mine, and I will not let her be ridiculed by anyone, not even you." The silence cracked into chaos. Guests murmured, some rising from their chairs, others craning their necks for a better view. Phones appeared, recording, spreading the moment before it had even finished. Olivia clutched her glass so hard the stem snapped, red wine spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. She hissed under her breath, her eyes darting to me, filled with fury and disbelief. My dad swayed slightly, his hand gripping the back of his chair as if to steady himself. His lips moved, but no words came. For once, the man who had always controlled the room had nothing to say. I straightened in my chair, my pulse racing. But for the first time in my life, I did not feel small. I felt powerful, not because of David's declaration, but because the truth had cracked their perfect facade. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of silence had led to this. The orchestra tried to resume, a violin screeching uncertainly before faltering again. The conductor lowered his baton, shaking his head. Waiters froze mid-stride, unsure whether to serve dessert or abandon their trays. Rebecca Stone's voice rang out above the whispers. "Richard, is it true? Is your daughter carrying your partner's child?" Cameras clicked, the questions piling up. My dad's face twisted fury, battling fear, but still no words came. David placed a protective hand on the table near mine, his stance steady as a pillar. "Yes, it is true," he said. "And if any of you think less of her for it, you will answer me." The crowd erupted in gasps again. Some guests stood quickly, muttering excuses as they left. Others leaned closer to whisper furiously, scandal gleaming in their eyes. I sat still, my breath steady now, my hands no longer trembling. For once, the humiliation did not belong to me. It belonged to them. My dad's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The sharp crack echoed through the silence that followed, and the shards glittered like broken pieces of the image he had spent a lifetime building. The morning after the Christmas dinner, Chicago felt quieter than usual, though I knew it was only an illusion. The city was buzzing with my family's disgrace. Headlines had splashed across local papers before dawn, and by breakfast the story was already circulating online. I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn, the glow of my laptop casting a pale light on my face as I scrolled through, article after article. "Carter heiress humiliated, no more," one headline read. "Partner claims paternity and shocking dinner revelation," said another. Photos captured the moment perfectly. My dad pale as stone, Olivia frozen mid-smirk, David standing tall with his hand clenched in resolve. My stomach churned, not from regret, but from the weight of what it meant. Secrets that had been my shield were now out in the open, and the city devoured them hungrily. My phone rang, nonstop texts from numbers I did not recognize, reporters begging for comment, colleagues sending cautious congratulations, distant relatives demanding explanations. I let most of it go unanswered, my silence once again my power. By noon, I received a call from Samantha. Her voice was breathless. "Tiff, it is everywhere. I cannot even open my email without seeing your name." "I know," I whispered, pressing a hand to my temple. She lowered her voice. Are you okay? I hesitated, staring at the ultrasound tucked in my drawer. I am not broken, I said softly. That is enough for now. While I tried to breathe through the whirlwind, Carter Construction staggered under the weight of scandal. Within 24 hours, investors began calling emergency meetings. Stocks dipped sharply, board members scrambled, and for the first time in decades, my dad's authority was questioned. Henry Adams, sharp and opportunistic, seized the moment. He called for accountability, speaking in clipped tones about reputational damage and fiduciary responsibility. His words carried weight, especially now that the media painted my dad as a man who could not control his own family, let alone a multi-million-dollar company. Michael worked frantically to hold the pieces together. I knew because he called me late one night, his voice rough with exhaustion. Do you have any idea what you have done, Tiffany? I clenched the phone tighter. What I have done, or what he has done, Michael groaned. You could have kept it quiet. We could have managed this. Instead, you let David... He trailed off, too angry to finish. I closed my eyes. Michael, you are a lawyer. You know the truth has a way of surfacing. Better now than later. Silence stretched on the line, then he muttered, You do not understand how fragile everything is, and hung up. The next morning, the story twisted further. Tom Parker's face appeared on the news. My stomach lurched as the reporter introduced him as my former fiancé. He spoke smoothly, his suit impeccable, his words dripping false sincerity. Tiffany has always been... complicated, he said, pausing for effect. She pushes people away, even those who care for her. I only hope she finds peace. I wanted to throw the remote through the screen. The man who had betrayed me was painting himself as a victim, siding with my dad by implication. My chest ached with rage. But hours later, the tide shifted again. Rebecca Stone released an article with evidence she had gathered quietly for months. Screenshots of Tom's messages, photos of him with the woman I had caught in his apartment, timestamps proving he had lied. The article shredded his credibility in one brutal sweep. By evening, the public no longer saw me as the broken woman left behind. They saw me as the one who had endured betrayal, who had survived cruelty, who had been silenced by a family that chose appearances over truth. Sympathy shifted, and with it pressure mounted against my dad. I watched the news that night, curled on my couch with my hands around a mug of tea. The anchor's voice was cool, professional. Richard Carter faces calls from the board to step down after a wave of investor concern. Sources say a vote of no confidence may be scheduled within days. My chest tightened, my breath caught. The man who had mocked me, dismissed me, broken me in front of strangers was finally being undone, not by me alone, but by the truth he could not contain. Yet even in his crumbling, he lashed out. 2 days later, I stopped by David's office downtown, a glass tower with sweeping views of the lake. I arrived early, waiting near the reception desk as assistants typed furiously at their computers. Through the glass walls, I saw my dad storm in, his face red, his hands clenched. He shoved past the secretary and burst into David's office. I moved closer unseen, the sound of their voices carrying through the partially open door. You destroyed me, my dad hissed. You humiliated me in front of 300 people. David's voice was calm, steady. You destroyed yourself, Richard. I only told the truth. My dad slammed his fist on the desk papers, scattering. You think you can take my daughter and my company. You will regret this. David rose slowly, his frame towering, his voice unshaken. I will not regret protecting Tiffany. You should regret never doing the same. My heart pounded as I pressed against the wall outside, my breath shallow. For the first time in my life, I heard someone stand up to my dad without flinching. The moment carved itself into me like a scar of hope. My dad stormed out minutes later, his eyes wild, his tie askew. He did not see me as he passed, or maybe he did and chose to ignore me. His footsteps echoed down the hall until they vanished. I stepped into David's office, my hands trembling. He turned to me, his expression softening. I am sorry you heard that. I shook my head. No, I needed to. He crossed the room and took my hand, his warmth steadying me. Tiffany, this is only the beginning. They will come after us harder now. I lifted my chin. Let them. I'm not afraid anymore. The city lights stretched across the windows behind him, glittering like a promise. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear lift, replaced by something fierce and unyielding. The empire my dad had built was cracking, and through those cracks, I saw the first glimmer of freedom. The vote came faster than anyone expected. 1 week after the Christmas dinner, the board of Carter Construction gathered in the glass tower downtown. Snow fell thick against the windows, blurring the city skyline, as if nature itself wanted to shield the world from the ugliness inside that room. I was not there, but Michael told me afterward how the air felt heavy, how the members whispered among themselves while my dad sat stiff in his chair, his face drained of its usual command. When the decision was called, it was swift, a vote of no confidence. Richard Carter was removed as CEO. The news broke across Chicago within the hour. By evening, the story was everywhere, anchors delivering it with the solemnity of a funeral. Carter Construction was forced into a leadership change after a scandal. Richard Carter was ousted amid family disgrace. His empire, the one he had built brick by brick over decades, had fallen in the span of days. I sat on my couch watching the screen flicker, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. My stomach shifted, the child inside me reminding me that life was still moving forward even as one world crumbled. I thought I would feel triumph, but what I felt was more complicated. Relief, yes. Justice, maybe. But also a strange sadness because even after everything he had done, he was still my dad. The days that followed revealed the cracks widening across my family. Olivia's marriage faltered almost instantly. Her husband, once proud to be attached to the Carter name, withdrew. At dinners, she was no longer the jewel of society, but the woman who had sneered at her own sister and been caught on camera, moments before disaster struck. I heard whispers that her husband had filed for separation, that friends no longer returned her calls. She faded quickly, her sharp tongue dulled without an audience. My mother suffered in quieter ways. The charity circles that had once fawned over her pearls and her perfectly curated smile now avoided her. Invitations stopped arriving. She began staying home, the drapes pulled tight, her voice thin when she called me once to say she had always tried her best. I listened in silence, remembering every sigh, every time she looked away while Dad tore me down. I did not know whether to pity her or despise her. Michael left the house soon after. He told me over coffee that he could no longer carry the weight of defending lies. "I need to live my own life," he said quietly, stirring sugar into his cup. "You were right, Tiffany. The truth wins eventually." He squeezed my hand before leaving, and for once I felt like I had an ally in my own blood. And then there was Tom. The man who had betrayed me, who had stood on television painting me as unstable, found himself drowning in scandal after Rebecca's article. Clients withdrew his company, questioned his credibility, and soon he was quietly let go. He called me once, his voice thick with desperation. "Tiffany, please, you know me. You know I made mistakes. Help me tell them." I listened, then hung up without a word. The silence that followed was the cleanest break I had ever given myself. As for my dad, he disappeared from public view. The last time I saw him was outside the hotel lobby weeks later. He stood alone, his coat collar pulled high against the wind, his face pale and gaunt. For a moment our eyes met across the swirling snow. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. I turned and walked away. Life did not become instantly easy. Gossip still swirled. Some people still judged. And every day I carried the weight of being visible in a way I never had before. But there was also freedom. My silence had finally turned into strength, my truth into armor. One evening I drove out to the Carter estate. The mansion glowed with warm lights as always. The wreaths still hanging through the holiday had passed. I parked at the edge of the long driveway, the snow crunching under my boots as I stepped out. The house looked smaller now, not the fortress it once was, but just a building filled with echoes of cruelty. I stood there with my hand on my stomach, feeling the gentle stir within me, and whispered to the night, "We are not them. We will never be them." Behind me, the city stretched wide, filled with lights and possibility. David stood by me, quiet, his hand steady on my shoulder. Yet even in his warmth, I wondered, had he stood for me out of love, or had it been a calculated move in his own game? The question lingered unanswered, but it did not haunt me. Because no matter his reasons, I knew my own. I would protect this child, I would live with dignity. I would not be broken again. As the wind rustled through the trees, I felt peace settle over me for the first time in years. Revenge had not healed me, but it had given me back my voice, and with it, the chance to build a new life. If you have ever been silenced, if you have ever been mocked or dismissed until you doubted your own worth, know this: you are stronger than their laughter. You are more than their lies. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply surviving with your head held high. Tell me in the comments if you have lived through something like this, if you have carried a secret and then found the strength to let it shine. Share your story. And if you want to hear more journeys of justice, betrayal, and the silent revenger who refuses to be broken, subscribe and stay with me. Our voices are stronger together.